My sister accused me of ruining her marriage with my husband. Evan kicked us out of their wedding and destroyed our family. But when she discovered the truth about his toxic jealousy, she was left broken. I'm 29 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer, and I still can't believe that my own sister, the person I grew up sharing absolutely everything with, accused me of trying to ruin her marriage with my husband. I mean, my husband Andrew, who I've been married to for 4 years, the same guy that my sister Madison has known for years and always had a super close relationship with, like siblings practically. But turns out her new husband, Evan, decided that friendship was something completely different and basically destroyed our entire family with his bullshit accusations. Sorry for the language, but it's just that when I think about everything that happened, I still get so angry. And I need to tell this because I've been holding this in for months and I can't anymore. Let me start from the beginning, I guess. Madison and I were always super close. You know? One of those sister relationships where you're best friends and tell each other everything. She's 2 years older than me, so she's 31 now. And throughout our entire lives, she was like my reference person for everything. When I met Andrew about 6 years ago, you think it was in 2019? Yeah, because it was right before the pandemic. I obviously introduced him to her immediately because it seemed important that they got along. And the truth is, they hit it off incredibly from the very first moment. It was like they'd been friends their whole lives. Andrew is one of those people who gets along with everyone. He's super laid back and has that kind of sarcastic humor that Madison loved. They played video games together, sent each other memes, that kind of thing. To me, it seemed perfect. You know? Like, my sister and my boyfriend get along well. What more could I ask for? When Andrew and I got married 4 years ago, Madison was my maid of honor. Obviously. And she gave a beautiful speech at the wedding about how Andrew was the brother she never had, and how happy she was that I had found someone so good. My parents also adored Andrew. Everyone adored him, really. He's that kind of person who, when you arrive at a family gathering, he's already in the kitchen helping your mom with the food or playing with your little cousins. So everything was perfect. Or so I thought. Madison met Evan about 2 years ago at her work. She's an accountant at a mid-sized company, and he worked in the same building but for another company. At first, he seemed like a normal guy. Kind of quiet but nice. They dated for several months before she formally introduced him to us, which I thought was weird because Madison always told me everything about her dates and relationships, but well, I assumed she simply wanted to be sure the thing was serious before introducing him to us. When we finally met him at a family dinner, Evan was polite, but definitely more reserved than Madison's previous boyfriends. He didn't talk much, sometimes responded with monosyllables, and I noticed that every time Andrew tried to joke with Madison like they always did, Evan would get kind of tense. But I thought, well, maybe he's shy or nervous about meeting the family. He'll relax eventually. What I didn't know was that from that first dinner, Evan was already building this narrative in his head that Andrew had romantic feelings for Madison. Looking back now, I can see the signs, like how he'd get uncomfortable every time Andrew and Madison interacted, or how he always found excuses for Madison not to come to our family gatherings if Andrew was going to be there. But at the time, I didn't pay attention to it, because Madison seemed happy with him and told me that Evan was just a little insecure, but was working on it. They got engaged after a year of dating, which seemed fast to me, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be that critical sister. Madison was excited, and I tried to be excited for her too, although I have to admit that Evan never really grew on me. There was something about the way he looked at her, like he was constantly monitoring her or something. And Madison started to change a little, like she stopped responding to my messages as quickly as before, canceled plans last minute, that kind of thing. When I asked her if everything was okay, she always said yes, that she and Evan were perfect, and she'd just been busy with wedding planning. The wedding was planned for last summer, like in July of last year. We received the formal invitation about 3 months before, all normal, nice invitation and everything. But about a week later, I received a separate note, handwritten by Madison, that said something like, "Please consider coming alone to the wedding. It would be better if Andrew doesn't attend." I stared at that note for like 10 minutes, unable to process what it said. Andrew was next to me, and when I showed it to him, he was also shocked. We tried to call Madison immediately, but she didn't answer. I sent her like 20 messages asking what the hell was going on and why she didn't want my husband at her wedding, but she only responded with a brief, "It's complicated. Please just do this for me." Andrew and I spent days trying to understand what Andrew had done or said, that could have offended Madison or Evan. We went over every interaction, every conversation, every message, and we couldn't find anything. Andrew was devastated, honestly, because he really loved Madison like a sister and didn't understand what had happened. I talked to my parents about the situation and they were also confused but told me that maybe they just wanted a small and intimate wedding and I shouldn't take it personally. But I knew that wasn't it because the guest list had like 200 people. It wasn't exactly an intimate wedding. After thinking about it a lot, Andrew and I decided that the note had to be some kind of bad joke or a misunderstanding. I mean, Madison and Andrew had been so close for years. It made no sense that suddenly she didn't want him at her wedding. So it decided to go anyway, thinking that when we got there we could talk to Madison and clear everything up. In retrospect, it was a terrible decision, but at the time it seemed like the right thing to do. The day of the wedding, we arrived at the venue, which was this beautiful place on the outskirts of the city with gardens and everything, and from the moment we walked in, I felt something was wrong. Evan's mom saw us and literally said something to someone in their ear while looking at us. Some relatives greeted us, but in a super awkward way, like when people don't know if they should be talking to you or not. We found our seats, which curiously were all the way in the back, as far as possible from the altar, and we sat down trying to act like everything was normal. The ceremony started and Madison looked beautiful, obviously, but when she was walking down the aisle and passed by us, I saw her expression change completely. Like, she went from being smiling to having this face of absolute horror. She looked at Andrew, then at me, and I could see she literally went pale. Evan also saw us and his face. I can't even describe it. It was pure fury. He whispered something in the officiant's ear, but the ceremony continued. During the entire exchange of vows, Evan kept throwing us death glares, and Madison looked like she was going to throw up at any moment. As soon as the ceremony ended and they were declared husband and wife, before they could even kiss, Evan literally pointed in our direction and yelled, "You need to leave now." Everyone turned to look at us, and I felt my face burning with shame. Andrew stood up and tried to approach to talk to them, but Evan came down from the altar and pushed him, like physically pushed him in the chest while yelling, "How dare we show up there when we weren't welcome?" Several of Evan's relatives also approached and basically escorted us to the exit while all the guests watched us in absolute silence. We left there humiliated and confused. I was crying in the car, unable to stop, and Andrew was in shock, just repeating over and over that he didn't understand what he had done wrong. We tried calling my parents, but they weren't answering. I sent messages to Madison begging her to please explain what was happening, but there was no response. It was literally one of the worst days of my life, and I didn't even know why it was happening. What came after was even worse, if that was possible. Like 2 hours after leaving the wedding, Evan posted something on his social media, something like thanks to everyone who respected our special day and understood that some people were not invited for very valid reasons. Unfortunately, some decided to ignore our wishes and cause drama on a day that was supposed to be about love and respect. He didn't mention us by name, but basically everyone who was at the wedding knew who he was talking about. The comments started filling up with people asking what happened, and some of my relatives, who were there, explaining that my husband and I showed up without invitation and caused a scene. And then the real hell started. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, everyone started sending me hate messages. They called me a homewrecker, asking if I had no shame. How could I do that to my own sister? That Andrew was a pervert obsessed with Madison. My cousin, Laura, who I always got along super well with, sent me a message that said something like, "I always knew there was something weird about the way your husband looked at Madison. You disgust me for allowing it." My uncle Roberto posted on Facebook something about how family is sacred and you have to protect it from toxic and manipulative people. And I knew he was talking about us even though he didn't say names. Andrew and I were completely lost. We had no idea what specific accusations were being made, but clearly they were serious. I tried calling my parents like 1,000 times until my mom finally answered. I asked her to come to my house, because I needed to understand what the hell was going on. She arrived like an hour later and looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be there, but felt she had to come. I sat with her in the living room and told her, "Mom, you need to tell me exactly what Madison and Evan told you because I have no idea why the whole family suddenly hates us." My mom sighed and told me that Evan had spoken with them several months ago, basically right after getting engaged to Madison, and had expressed his concern that Andrew had romantic feelings for Madison. That supposedly Andrew looked at her inappropriately, that he always looked for excuses to be alone with her, that he sent her private messages all the time, that kind of thing, and that Madison, after Evan pointed it out to her, started noticing those behaviors too and felt super uncomfortable but didn't know how to tell me. That's why the note asking us not to go to the wedding, because Madison didn't want Andrew there looking at her on her special day and making her feel uncomfortable. I sat there processing all of that and honestly couldn't believe it. I told my mom, "Do you really believe that? Do you really think that Andrew, my husband, the guy who loves me and has been nothing but respectful to Madison for years, is secretly in love with her?" My mom shrugged and said she didn't know what to think, but that Evan seemed very convinced and so did Madison, and that maybe I hadn't wanted to see the signs that hurt more than I can explain, you know? That my own mother didn't believe me, that she thought my husband was some kind of stalker, and I was too stupid or blind to realize it. I asked my mom to leave and spent the rest of the day crying. Andrew was just as devastated as me. He felt like his entire character was being attacked, and he couldn't defend himself because we didn't even know exactly what specific accusations were being made. That night I sat down and wrote a long message, like an essay, to my parents, explaining to them point by point why Evan's accusations were completely false. I reminded them of every family moment where Andrew and Madison had interacted in a completely appropriate and fraternal way. I showed them screenshots of group conversations where Andrew talked about Madison as his sister-in-law and sister. I explained that the private messages that Andrew supposedly sent Madison were actually messages in our family group chat where everyone participated. I ended the message saying that I understood they wanted to support Madison in her new marriage, but they weren't going to destroy my marriage and Andrew's reputation, based on the jealous fantasies of a guy we barely knew. I don't know if my message got through to them or what, but like 2 days later, my mom called me and said that she and my dad had talked to some relatives, showing them the evidence I had sent them, and that several people had realized that maybe they had judged the situation too quickly. Some aunts and uncles and cousins started sending me apology messages, saying they didn't have all the information and they regretted assuming the worst. My cousin Laura called me crying, asking for forgiveness for the horrible message she had sent me, but the damage was already done, and I wasn't sure I could forgive that easily. What really mattered to me was fixing things with Madison. I tried to contact her every way possible, but she had blocked me everywhere. Phone, social media, email, everything. I talked to my parents and asked them to please tell her I needed to talk to her, but they told me Madison had specifically asked them not to give me her new contact information. According to Evan, I was a toxic influence who didn't understand appropriate boundaries, and they needed space to build their marriage without my interference. It was like my sister had been replaced by a completely different person. About 3 months passed like this. 3 months where I was basically grieving the loss of my sister even though she was still alive. Andrew and I went to therapy because he was dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression from the whole situation. He felt like his reputation was ruined, and people would always see him as the weird guy obsessed with his sister-in-law. I tried to be strong for him, but the truth is I was devastated too. I missed my sister every day, wanted to call her and tell her things like I always did, but I couldn't anymore. And then one night, it was like 11 at night on a Tuesday, someone knocked on my door desperately. Andrew and I were already in pajamas watching a movie, and we got a little scared by how aggressive the knocking sounded. Andrew went to look through the peephole and turned to me with a surprised face, saying, "It's Madison." We opened the door and there was my sister, with swollen eyes from crying, makeup smeared all over her face, shaking. She threw herself into my arms and started sobbing, in a way I had never seen her cry, not even when our grandfather died. We brought her in, and I made her tea, while she tried to calm down enough to talk. Andrew stayed in the background, clearly uncomfortable but worried about her. Finally, Madison started talking and told me everything, absolutely everything. She told me that Evan had started showing signs of being controlling and jealous from the beginning of their relationship, but she had ignored or justified them, thinking it was because he loved her so much. That after he met us that first time at the family dinner, Evan started making comments about how Andrew looked at her, how he treated her, insinuating there was something inappropriate there. At first, Madison told him he was crazy, that Andrew was my husband and saw her as a sister. But Evan was persistent. He showed her moments taken completely out of context, like if Andrew asked Madison how she was in the family chat, Evan would say why was he asking her specifically and not everyone? Or if Andrew greeted her with a hug at family gatherings, Evan would say the hug lasted too long. Over time, Madison started doubting herself and her own perceptions. Evan was so convincing and so sure of what he said that she started reinterpreting years of normal and fraternal interactions with Andrew as something more. She told me she hated to admit it, but that Evan had basically manipulated her into believing something that wasn't real, and that by the time the wedding came around, she really believed Andrew had feelings for her and that I was naive for not realizing it. She apologized over and over, saying she didn't know how she had let things get so far. I asked her what had finally made her realize the truth, and she told me that Evan hadn't stopped after the wedding, that now he started with accusations about her coworkers, saying her male boss looked at her inappropriately, that her college friend she sometimes had lunch with was obviously interested in her, that all the men around her wanted something to her. He had asked her to quit her job, to cut contact with her male friends, to delete her coworkers from social media. When Madison tried to reason with him saying he was being irrational, Evan exploded and accused her of wanting to cheat on him, of not loving him enough, of prioritizing other men over their marriage. Madison told me that at that moment something clicked in her head, and she realized the pattern, that Evan wasn't reacting to real behaviors from other people, but projecting his own insecurities onto every situation, that she had destroyed her relationship with me and had allowed my husband to be falsely accused of horrible things based on Evan's paranoia, that she had ruined my family reputation and Andrew's, and that the worst part was that deep down, she always knew it wasn't true, but it was easier to believe Evan than face that she had made a huge mistake marrying him. She asked to stay at my house that night because she couldn't go back to Evan, and my parents were traveling. Obviously, I said yes, that she could stay as long as she needed. I prepared the guest room, and Andrew and I stayed up late talking about everything that had happened. He was relieved that the truth was finally coming out, but also worried about Madison and how she was going to proceed. I was in this weird mix of emotions, like I was happy to have my sister back, but also furious about all the pain she had caused us, although I understood that she had also been a victim of Evan's manipulation. The next morning, Madison looked a little better. She had slept, although not much according to what she told me. We had breakfast together and talked more calmly about everything. I asked her what she was planning to do about Evan, and she said she needed time to think, that maybe they could go to couples therapy or something. I told her I thought Evan had deeper problems that needed individual therapy, and that she should seriously consider whether she wanted to be in a marriage where her husband isolated her from her family and friends with false accusations. But I didn't want to pressure her because I knew it was a decision she had to make for herself. Madison went back to Evan like 2 days later. Honestly, it surprised and disappointed me a little, but it's not like I could force her to leave him. We stayed in contact after that. We talked by message almost every day and saw each other when we could, although Evan obviously wasn't happy about it. Madison told me he made passive-aggressive comments about how much time she spent talking to me or why she needed to see me so often. I tried to be supportive of her without being critical of her decision to stay with him, although honestly it was difficult. Things exploded again like a month later. Madison called me crying in the middle of a workday, saying Evan had given her an ultimatum. Either she quit her job because he didn't trust her boss and coworkers, or the marriage was over. And this time Madison told him no, that she wasn't going to quit her career because of his unfounded insecurities. Evan apparently got furious, yelled at her that she clearly didn't love him and that she would regret choosing her job over their marriage. Madison packed a suitcase and left the house. This time, when Madison arrived at my door, she was more determined than devastated. She told me she was going to ask Evan for a divorce, that she had seen a lawyer that same day during her lunch hour, and she was clear that the marriage was a mistake she needed to correct. My parents had already returned from their trip by then, and when they found out about everything that had been happening, they felt horrible for believing Evan and for not being there for Madison. My mom called several relatives telling them the truth about the situation and asking them to support Madison in her divorce. Evan didn't take it well. Not at all. He showed up at my house at like 2 in the morning a few days later, banging on the door and yelling that he needed to talk to Madison. We called the police and they told him to leave or they'd arrest him for disturbing the peace. The next day, Madison received like 50 messages from him, some begging her to come back, promising he would change, others accusing her of being a bad wife and threatening to ruin her reputation just like she supposedly ruined his. Madison blocked his number and only communicated with him through her lawyer. The divorce process took several months because Evan basically did everything possible to make it difficult and prolonged. He tried to fight for the house even though it was in Madison's name because she had bought it before meeting him. He tried to ask for financial compensation, claiming he had left job opportunities to focus on the marriage, which was a lie. It was basically a disaster. But Madison stayed firm throughout the entire process. Even when Evan showed up at her work one day, crying and begging her to reconsider, even when he sent her flowers and letters saying he was going to kill himself if she left him, those typical manipulation tactics that abusers use to maintain control. The divorce was finally finalized like 3 months ago. Madison is living alone in her house again, went back to therapy to process everything that happened, and little by little is rebuilding her life and relationships. Things between us aren't exactly like they were before, honestly, because something happened that I can't just forget. But we're working on rebuilding trust, and I understand that she was also a victim in all this. Andrew has been incredibly understanding and patient with the whole process, although I know it still hurts him to think about how he was accused and treated by the family. Evan tried to contact me like a month ago, sent me a long message apologizing and saying he was in therapy working on his jealousy and control issues. Honestly, I didn't respond and blocked his number because I have no interest in having any kind of relationship or communication with him after all the damage he caused. Madison says he still tries to contact her from time to time, but she ignores all his attempts. Last week, we all went together, my parents, Madison, Andrew, and me, to a family lunch. It was kind of weird at first, but eventually the conversation flowed more naturally, and we could laugh about some things. Madison and Andrew looked at each other at one point and she told him, "I'm so sorry for everything that happened. I never should have doubted you." And Andrew responded that the important thing was that now everyone knew the truth and they could move forward. It was a nice moment, I guess. Although there are still times where I see Andrew get a little tense or uncomfortable around Madison, like he's afraid his actions will be misinterpreted again. And that breaks my heart because he's the least deserving person of everything they put him through. I don't know. The truth is, this whole situation taught me that sometimes the people you love can hurt you incredibly, even without direct intention to do so, when they allow others to manipulate them. It taught me that jealousy and control in a relationship aren't signs of love but giant red flags that shouldn't be ignored. And it taught me that defending your truth and that of the people you love is worth it, even when in the moment it seems like everyone is against you. It still hurts me to think about everything we went through, the hate messages, the humiliation at the wedding, seeing Andrew devastated, questioning his own character. But at least now Madison is out of that toxic relationship and our family is on the path to healing, even though the process is slow and sometimes painful.